More rants, more discussions on things that I think hold value. I'm going to talk about coming off antidepressants today, and this is going to be in the context of TRT. And I would say that the video could still apply to people who aren't on TRT, but I am going to reference testosterone a little bit in this, but it still applies. Firstly, this is not going to be like the biohacker supplement stack to support the weaning and the rebounding off the SSRI. I'm not doing that. Other people have done that. I think a lot of people have done a shit job with it, so I'll probably do a better one a bit later on at some point. But it's a very different discussion, and I think that a lot of the time, actually, I would say the majority of the time in the demographic that I work with, that people fixate far too much on that side of the equation, and they do not focus anywhere near enough on what I'm going to talk about today, which is the mindset and the general understanding of what's going on and how to integrate and move forward from it. And I think that there is a time and a place for both. And I think that both synergize in a very important way where it is extremely beneficial to achieving the outcome that you're ultimately trying to achieve to do them both together because of the compounding multiplying effect. So, coming off antidepressants sucks. And it sucks for a number of reasons. And I think one of the key reasons that it sucks is that you essentially have to raw dog all the shit that you have suppressed for X amount of months or years. And the reason why this can be quite difficult from what I have seen in the conversations that I've had with my clients around this, and I'm going to put the disclaimer in here first because I can already feel people just mashing their keyboards with fury and rage. Speak to your fucking doctor about coming off antidepressants if that's what you want to do. I'm not encouraging anyone does anything. But for those who are wanting to take this journey, I think the big thing that comes up is you get down the line in life, and whether it's months or years or decades, where you have been going through life in an altered state, where you have numbed or suppressed, or another way of looking at it is that you have altered your neurochemistry to therefore alter your perception of reality. And the challenge of this is when you come out of this altered state, when you revert to baseline, and due to the rebound effect of the antidepressants, that baseline is actually going to be amplified because you're going to have the opposite effect of what the drug was doing during the withdrawal period. You are going to have built an identity for yourself and constructed a reality around you which was reliant, supported, and I guess built on the foundation of what was neurochemically a lie. And the challenge of that, and the analogy that I was using when I was explaining this to someone this morning in terms of my perspective on this, and again, this is just my opinions. You can disagree all you like. I don't fucking care. I think it's kind of like going through a video game with cheats. And again, people might get triggered by the idea that antidepressants are cheats. Feel free to cry in the comments. I'm not going to read it. But it's like going through a video game and getting to the end of the game with the cheat codes on, and then playing the final level with the hard difficulty, turning all the cheat codes off. It's like going through Halo on Legendary with like extra overshield and like unlimited rocket launcher. And then you get to the last level, the more, and then you take off the cheat codes, but you're still on Legendary, and you realize that you don't actually really know how to play the game properly. But you also didn't go through all the difficulties in the game in the prior levels that trained you and prepared you for the final level. So now when you remove the cheat codes, all of a sudden the game is as hard as it should have been, but it feels so much harder because you were used to playing it with the cheats on. And dealing with that, but it not being a video game that you can just switch off, but it being real life and you've got a career and you've got family and you've got responsibilities, that's fucking real. So if you were already in a situation before you started the antidepressants where you had a nervous mindset or you lacked courage or you lacked bravery or you lacked resilience or you have unintegrated traumas or whatever reason that you went on them in the first place, and I think that people have very reasonable explanations and contexts for seeking an intervention to help them where they're not able to handle what life has thrown at them. You now have to deal with that too. And I think that's difficult because what I see is guys who have built families or lives for themselves, careers, circumstances, all of these things which are very real, very challenging. And then they take the antidepressant away and they realize that they don't actually have the fundamental skills to regulate their emotions, to manage their stresses properly, and to actually face reality in an unaltered state and keep their shit together in the process. And I think this is not a failure of the individual. I think this is a failure of the treatment protocol. I think this is a failure of the system, one, laying down antidepressants as a frontline treatment, and two, not layering it with psychotherapy, and three, encouraging people to stay on these long term, which is not how they were originally created or intended to be. But that's a discussion for another day with my thoughts on the psychiatric industry. But I think this process is very difficult for people because we can identify that this is true and we can identify this analogy and go, okay, yeah, that sounds about right. I feel like I'm now playing, Halo on Legendary last difficulty, and I could barely pass the first stage on normal because I've just cheated my way through the whole game. But that doesn't really help because now you're still stuck in that last level of the game, but you can't switch the game off because it's life and there's high stakes and it's real. And I think that comes a lot of the time with shame and guilt and a massive amplification of the initial low self-esteem which led them down the path in the first place. And I think there's very little discussion or information for guys in this scenario in terms of what they should do. So I will offer my 2 cents in the hope that it may help. Is that if you have been fortunate enough to realize that low testosterone may have been the reason that drove you to using antidepressants in the first place, which it is absolutely not the reason for every guy having depression. That is not what I'm saying. But for the guys who I work with, a lot of the time it's true. And that's just my demographic. But again, if you're watching this video, you're probably in my fucking demographic. So it does appeal to you. So I think that can first be helpful to understand that there was something biologically off. And now you've actually fixed the underlying problem. So to go back to the Halo analogy, what I think you have to do is you have to go back through the earlier stages of the game and learn the skills that you didn't learn. Go through the exercises, go through the tutorials, go through those early levels and build the skills, because ultimately you do need to pass that last level. You do need to pass the final, you do need to pass the more on Legendary, because that's what you've built up to do and that's where your life has progressed to. And that's the reality of being an adult. The first couple of levels of Halo are like being a teenager. Sweet. Heaps of fun. Well, depending on your childhood, maybe if you were traumatized, it wasn't that fun. But objectively, you probably, and again, exceptions to the rule, you probably had less responsibilities when you were a teenager. So the game was easier. So it's more fun. You fuck around more. But the difficulty when you get to the later stages of the game is if you fuck around, you're going to find out. Those little grunts have rocket launchers now. And those flood come up and whack you from behind and they can one-shot you, and that's quite difficult. So I think the path forward in terms of, again, going back to using the game as the analogy, is that you would go back through the game, the early stages, and you would work out what skills you missed that you blasted through with your cheat codes on. And I think in life, what this is, it's learning the foundational skills that you missed. It's going through exercises, it's going through training programs to help you get to the point that you can handle reality and you can handle those circumstances without a rose-tinted filter on life, because life is not supposed to have that. You are supposed to feel feelings of shame when you can't do the things that you need to do. You are supposed to have low self-esteem when you're not capable of being the person that you could be. If you're obese and you're an alcoholic and you've been treating your body like crap, when you look in the mirror, you're supposed to feel disgusted and disappointed. That's the point. It's feedback to say you're doing the wrong thing, you're fucking up. And the solution is not numbing that feeling, it's doing something about it. But the problem is doing something about it is hard, but it can be done. It's just more uncomfortable in the short term. But what people come to learn in this process, and again, it's not the point of saying, I told you so, but it's just so that people understand, it's that discomfort, if you let it build up and push it under the bed and keep pushing it under the bed, keep pushing it under the bed, eventually you're going to have to look under there and deal with all of that. And it's much bigger and more uncomfortable down the line because life gets objectively harder as you move forward because you have a higher expectation of your capacity as a man and you probably have more responsibilities. So I think the things that people should do and the things that people should go through in this state is you should address it from multiple angles. And it's looking at things and going, okay, well, there's probably synergies to me developing multiple skill sets here. And they'll probably all cross over into one another. Even if I don't understand now how they could, just trust that they probably will, because again, I don't have anything to sell you. I don't sell any of this shit. I just do this a lot for work. So the things that I would recommend that people look into, and again, these are not going to be panaceas that solve the whole problem. These are just pieces of the fucking puzzle, and it's a big puzzle and it's a difficult puzzle, but it's a puzzle that you have to do. One is mindfulness meditation. You need to learn to regulate your emotions. You need to learn to be able to go to war with that voice in your head, that torturous inner monologue that doesn't like you, and you need to learn to control your mind or it will control you. And that's difficult and that's challenging because now you're sitting down in a state which is not only completely lacking stimulation, it's objectively boring, but now you're going to have to look that stuff in the eye. And a lot of the time, you're looking things in the eye that are unpleasant and uncomfortable to look at. That's not nice, but it's a really helpful skill for you to develop because what you need to do is learn to actually exert your willpower. You need to have the foundational skill to go, okay, when I wake up in the morning and my alarm goes off to go to the gym and I don't want to when I hit snooze, I need to be able to have the skill to override that. And that's a big skill to have because first thing in the morning when the alarm goes off, your willpower and your mindset is very, very different than the mindset that set the alarm the night before. Same thing when it comes to Friday night, Saturday night, when you're going to say, I'm not going to drink this weekend, and then you drink that weekend. And then on Sunday and Monday, you feel like a failure because you didn't keep your word to yourself. You're supposed to feel like a dickhead for that because you fucked up. That's a signal not to do it again. So numbing that signal for a decade has been a problem, or numbing that signal for 6 months or a year or whatever, that's a problem. But now you need to learn to go, okay, I need the skill to be able to prevent that being a problem. And what's the skill? I need to be able to choose what I need to do, not what I want to do, and override impulse control. And that takes emotional regulation. So that's one. Number two, I think it's important to push your boundaries and go and do something objectively difficult. If you get overwhelmed by cleaning your room, if you get overwhelmed by going to the gym and doing 20 minutes on the treadmill, if you get overwhelmed by opening your email inbox on a Monday morning and you have a fucking panic attack over it, you need to recognize that that is a objectively inappropriate overreaction to where that stressor is. And if you're finding that too difficult and that's too hard, the solution is not to make your life easier, it's for you to get harder. That's the solution. So go and do things that are objectively more difficult. So if you have a panic attack opening your inbox, go and do some boxing, go and do some Muay Thai, go and do some jiu-jitsu. That's objectively much harder. And if you can go and push yourself to do that and overcome that, and go and do these hard things that you don't need to do just for the sake of doing them to get some perspective, not only are you going to feel confident in that and you're going to gain capacity and new skill, but now all these other things are going to objectively seem easier because they are very, very useful skills. I like to look at that as yin and yang. And the last one, which I spoke about yesterday in my group, is that I think that you have to be able to forgive yourself for fucking up and making a mistake, but also to hold yourself accountable at the same time. And I think that sometimes we can go to extremes with this. I think we need to have compassion and understanding for ourselves as a human. We made the best decision at the time, knowing what we knew. And that might have been the wrong decision that we can see in hindsight because hindsight's 2020. But at the time, if you made a mistake, going on an antidepressant for a year, 5 years, 10 years, and now you're dealing with the aftermath of that, you need to have compassion and forgiveness for yourself and look after yourself the way that you would look after someone that you love, but also hold yourself accountable to go, okay, this is a shit situation I'm in, but I got myself into this situation and I can sure as shit get myself out. Hope that helps.